Good afternoon. I'm Ellie Feit. I'm the Research Director of the Wharton Customer Analytics Initiative. We're delighted to be bringing you this webinar on data-driven donor management. Professor Pete Fader from the Wharton School will be talking to you about using simple metrics, just recency and frequency, to determine whether donors are lapsed or dormant. And then Professor David Schweidel from the University of Wisconsin-Madison will be talking to you about how fundraising efforts impact donation activity and exactly how we measure that. But before we get to Pete and David's presentations, I'd first like to tell you a bit about the Customer Analytics Initiative. And the first question everyone asks me about the initiative is, just what is customer analytics? And I have a definition here on the slide, but there's two things I really want to emphasize. First is that organizations are just awash in data about their customers, from transactions and donations to online reviews, to social network activities, to geolocation information. All kinds of data is now available about your donors or your customers. And the Customer Analytics Initiative is focused on figuring out how to leverage that data to make better business decisions, from which donors to target, to how much to ask for, to designing really what the best, most appealing appeals will be. And that's really what the Customer Analytics Initiative is all about. You may wonder how we do that. Well, we act as a bridge between the academic community and the practitioner community. So organizations that are eager to improve customer analytics come together with academics who are really excited about inventing the next generation of predictive models and decision support tools. We build those connections in a lot of different ways. I don't want to go through all the details of how we bring academics and practitioners together. You can read more about that on our website. But these webinars are one way we bring the work of academics to practitioners like everyone in the audience. And in the spirit of bringing together academics and practitioners, we've invited Bob Christian, who serves as the VP of Analytics for Russ Reed, to make some remarks and serve as sort of the voice of the practitioner in this webinar. Russ Reed is North America's largest direct response fundraising firm, serving nonprofit organizations across international relief and development, social services, health services, animal welfare, environmental efforts, faith-based missions, and education. Every year, Russ Reed campaigns bring in over 1 million donors and raise more than $2 million daily. Russ Reed acquires donors through integrated campaigns using television, digital, direct mail, catalog, and more, and through data-driven segmentation and targeting methodologies. In addition to full-service direct response fundraising expertise, Russ Reed assists clients in securing federal funding and changing public policy. Rob, would you like to make a few comments before we get started?
Sure. Thanks, Ellie. And hello to everyone on the call, especially the Russ Reed clients and friends. Thanks for joining us. Russ Reed and the Wharton Customer Analytics Initiative team have forged a partnership. And together we're scoping out a collaborative research project that we believe will be of great interest to many organizations in the nonprofit industry. The Russ Reed team is looking forward to working with the Wharton team in finding ways to help nonprofits continue to grow and prosper. And we're very happy to be part of this webinar today. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Rob. So rather than wasting any more time on the introductions, I'm going to hand it off now to Professor Pete Fader, who is going to talk to us about how you figure out whether customers are lapsed or dormant.
Thanks very much, Ellie, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending on where you are. We're delighted to have an opportunity to talk about some of the research that goes on in the Ivory Tower that's of genuine interest, driven by real-world problems, and we believe offers solutions and useful insights that wouldn't be available otherwise. And so this is just one example of the kind of work that we do. I'm going to lay out what I think is a fairly simple descriptive model that just captures and projects the patterns of people's propensities to make donations or engage in some other kind of behavior. I'm just going to lay it on out there, show you how well it works, and then hand things off to David Schweidel, a former Wharton PhD student, now on the faculty at Wisconsin, who will talk a little bit more about the so what, not just projecting the donations, but understanding the dual causality between solicitations. In some sense, solicitations drive the donation behavior, but obviously people's past behavior also drives the solicitations that they might receive. First, I want to just put out this basic idea. Let me show you the setting that we're talking about over here. And as you can see, it's a nonprofit. It doesn't even matter exactly which one it is, what sector it's from. It's a large organization that many of you would be familiar with. Many of you have probably donated to it. Again, it doesn't matter what organization it is. It doesn't matter what sector they're in the nonprofit space. It doesn't even matter that they're a nonprofit. As you'll see shortly, the basic data structure we're talking about and the questions we hope to address are surprisingly general, and that's part of our goal, as Ellie implied earlier, in making it multidisciplinary, is to come up with methods and raise and answer questions that are broadly applicable across sectors. The one commonality is the availability of this individual level data. In this particular case, the quote-unquote customers are donors to this nonprofit. As you can see on the slide here, there are 11,104 people who made their first donation to this organization in 1995. And what we're going to do is track them over the next 6 years, asking the question, did they make a donation in each of those 6 years or not? And then ultimately what we want to do is make forecasts for what they'll do over the next 5 years beyond that. So we're going to build a predictive model here. If you're interested, all of the details for my part of the talk are available in this paper here. Very glad to share it with you. We can make it available in a variety of ways. And if you'd like to go deeper to find out actually how to do this kind of analysis, and it requires nothing more than Microsoft Excel, then towards the end of the webinar, we'll talk about a workshop that we'll be conducting in San Francisco next month, where you can roll up your sleeves and figure out how to build, diagnose, and leverage these kinds of models. So first, let me give you a snapshot of the data set that we're talking about over here, so you can get a better sense of the setting. As you can see, we have 11,000 people, all of whom made a donation in 1995. That was the behavior that brought them onto our radar, so we're not going to model that behavior or include it in our models. We're going to start the clock, we're going to start the model after that initial donation was made. And as you can see over here, each person had 6 opportunities to make a donation. Did they donate to this nonprofit or not in each of those 6 years? For the moment, we're ignoring how much they donated. We're ignoring what solicitations they might have received. We're just looking at the raw observed behavior. Did they donate or not? David will add on the latter piece, the interplay with solicitations. It's not too hard to snap on the how many donations they made or the monetary value associated with them or other touch points that might be involved in the relationship. But let's start fairly simple. Let's just look at the presence, absence of donations and ask some questions about some of these individual donors to say, what will they do over the next 5 years? So let's start over here with Bob. So Bob is one of the donors that we like the most. After being born in 1995, he made 6 donations in each of those 6 subsequent opportunities. And so the big question is, what would be our expectations for Bob or other donors like him over the next 5 years? In fact, I'd like to do that as an interactive poll here. So the data are fairly clear. Bob has made 6 donations out of 6 opportunities. And so why don't we bring up this polling opportunity for you to say, how many donations would we expect Bob or a donor like Bob to make over the next 5 years? So I think we can push the poll out there somehow, and we'll raise the question. So I can show you the question over here, and then somehow we'll make technology magic work for you to actually be able to vote as to which of these numbers is the best guess of how many donations Bob will make over the next 5 opportunities, over the next 5 years. So I'm hoping that a polling opportunity is now live, and that I'm not exactly sure how that works. Maybe one of my partners in crime here can tell me. So you all should be voting on that right now. I'll just give it a few more seconds, and then we'll be able to look at the survey results to see what people think about this kind of donor. I hope you agree that this is a very important question, and a difficult answer. It'd be really nice to know what our expectations would be. So let's look at the results for the survey over here. and if we can push that forward so everyone can share it, we'll see that the majority of people are saying that if Bob gave 6 out of 6 times in the past, that he'll give 5 out of 5 times in the future. I don't think people would be particularly surprised by that. What I think you will be surprised at is the actual answer, because that's not it, as you'll see. But before I get to the answer about the Bob question, why don't I go ahead and talk about the extreme opposite. Instead of Bob, how about someone like Sarah, who has done absolutely nothing since being, quote-unquote, acquired as a donor. So we brought her in 1995. She's done absolutely nothing since then. Obviously, our future expectations for someone like Sarah, and there are many, many donors like her, as you can see here, and as you know from your own experience, but she's still worth something. And I won't raise this as a polling question, but we will come back later in the talk here to get a better sense of just how much we'd expect out of someone like Sarah. Instead, let me move ahead to 2 other donors, make it just a little bit more complex here. And so let me introduce you to Mary and Sharmila. So take a moment and look at their histories. I'll say nothing other than the fact that they were both born in 1995. You can see their behavior of what they did since then. And so I'm going to ask you a qualitative question here, which is, which one of them, Mary or Sharmila, would be expected to make more donations over the next 5 years? So which one of them would be a more valuable member of our donor or customer base for us? Or are they basically the same? So look at the numbers, look at the number and the flow of their donation behavior, and answer this question for me. Who is more valuable over the next 5 years, Mary or Sharmila? So let's push that a polling opportunity out there and see what people think. Because the answer to this question is going to give us a great deal of insight as to what's really driving this kind of behavior over here. So take a moment, think about Mary versus Sharmila. Yes?
While everybody's voting, we have the results of the first poll in.
And what are those numbers, Ellie?
So 52% chose number 5, chose A 5 times.
So a clear majority saying that if he gave 6 out of 6 in the past, he'll go 5 out of 5 in the future. And then it looks like a roughly equal spread at the lesser levels. And we will come back to Bob, and we'll see what our model predicts, and then what the actual data seem to suggest. And at the same time, I hope that we now have our results for the Mary versus Sharmila challenge. And if we look at those numbers, the early results are suggesting a fairly strong majority of people are leaning towards Mary. And I would, in contrast to Bob, where I think the majority was a bit mistaken, as we'll see, in this case, people are quite right. And if we go to the next slide, we'll get a better sense of exactly how Mary and Sharmila differ from each other, and that's going to open up broader insights about what's going on and the kinds of behaviors that we hope to capture and project in our model. I'm going to go inside the heads of that majority of people who chose Mary over Sharmila, and it's not an obvious choice, because if you look carefully at the data here, you'll notice that Sharmila gave 5 out of the 6 opportunities. Mary gave only 4 out of the 6 times. Generally, we prefer donors who have done more. But why is it that we favor Mary over Sharmila? It's because of the difference on recency. That Mary gave at the most recent opportunity, in this case 2001, Sharmila didn't. So we're getting this implicit sense or explicit sense based on the polling of the participants here that recency in this case trumps frequency. And I think that's quite right, and I want to build on that and quantify it as we move ahead. So we get the idea that recency and frequency matter. I don't think that that's a surprise. I think that everybody on the call would recognize that those are very important characteristics, both to profile and project a donation behavior. But it's going to help us understand what's going on below the surface. See, our concern with Sharmila is that she might not just have skipped a year, she forgot to send in the check, but maybe she went away. Maybe Sharmila is no longer interested in this particular service or working with this particular nonprofit, or maybe she moved, or maybe something else happened. There's just a good chance that Sharmila is no longer with us. So we want to understand this trade-off between whether she's just dormant, in other words, she's alive but just taking a time off, or whether she's truly lapsed. And that's going to be, it's critical to every nonprofit, and we're going to try to zoom in on that and have just a better sense of what's going on there. So we can look at someone's donation history. In this particular case, if someone's given each of the last 2 years, we have a better sense that that person is alive and is at least going to contemplate making a donation at the next opportunity. Whereas if someone hasn't been around for a while, there's a pretty good chance that they've lapsed. And the longer that while is, the higher and higher the chance that they've lapsed. So many nonprofits and their vendors will look at these kinds of data to make statements about whether this person is dormant or lapsed, alive or dead. And very often they'll come up with rules of thumb. If they haven't done anything for the last, let's say, 3 opportunities, then we're going to write them off. I'm not that comfortable with just simple rules of thumb that aren't necessarily borne out by data. And so we're going to develop a statistical model, and I will spare you all the technical details about it, but it's a surprisingly simple statistical model that's going to take all of the information into account and give us the best guess or a specific probability about whether this person is still alive or not. And what's remarkable about this model that we're going to develop here is that it takes absolutely nothing into account besides recency and frequency. I don't need to know the full history of people. I don't need to know anything about their demographics or touch points that they've had with the organization. You just give me the kinds of zeros and ones and summarize it by recency and frequency, and I'll be able to make, as you'll see, a fairly accurate statement about what they're likely to do next. And so to help reinforce these ideas, why don't we look at one more comparison. Let's stick with Mary and put Sharmila aside and bring in Chris over here. So again, we're going to look at these 2 different profiles. You can look at them on your own and try to make a guess, once again, about which one of these donors, Mary versus Chris, would be expected to make more donations over the next 5 years. Is it Mary, is it Chris, or would you view them as basically equal? So we can push this poll out there. Again, look at the data, try to figure out what factors you would take into account in making this decision, and let's see what everyone says. So think about
I want to just remind everyone that if you're watching in full screen mode, the voting doesn't necessarily come up, so you need to exit out of full screen mode, and you'll get to the screen where you can do the voting in the survey.
Thank you, Ellie. And I hope you can see from what I said just before bringing this poll up that the answer to this one is going to be roughly equal. Because, as I said, for this particular model and for my overall perspectives on this kind of decision-making behavior, all that matters is recency and frequency. So Mary and Chris are tied. They both have the same recency and frequency. And therefore, we should say, you know what? The other differences in their donation history, some of the zeros and ones further back, don't really matter that much. And we shouldn't spend a great deal of effort trying to break the tie between Mary and Chris. We shouldn't try to put them in different buckets. Let's just treat them the same, as roughly equal, which is indeed what most of you had said here. So we want to understand other situations where we can lump people together versus those where we actually can break the tie. So let me just give you just a very brief idea of how you can do this at home on your own. Again, it's a fairly simple model because the inputs to it are only recency and frequency. It lets us take what can be a fairly rich and complex donation history and summarize it just by recency, frequency, the number of overall opportunities that people had, in this case 6, and the number of people that have each of those different recency-frequency combinations. Once again, we're going to ignore anything else about these people. All I want to know is how many donations did you make since you were born, and when did the last one occur? As tempting as it is to use other behavioral or demographic or attitudinal or psychographic information about these people, I'm going to ignore it. I might bring those factors in later on to help color in and help me better understand this behavior, but just in terms of predicting the behavior itself, I'm going to look at nothing else besides the recency and frequency of the donation history. It might sound excessively simple. It is simple, but I don't think it's excessively so. One of the benefits of doing this is being able to convey the data and run the model in a platform as simple as Microsoft Excel. So what you can see on the next slide here isn't just a summary of the data set and the model. This is the whole thing. And I don't expect you to be able to fully understand and appreciate all the details here. I just want to say two things. Number one, this is everything. All 11,000 people are conveyed here. If you look real carefully, you can see in column D the number of donors, and the columns to the left of it give you the recency. That would be T_X. That would be the time of your latest donation. And the column to the left of it would be X, the number of donations you made. There you go. That's recency and frequency. We see the number of people associated with each of those different RF combinations. That's the entire data set right there. The columns to the right I won't go into. If you do want to know how to build and use this spreadsheet, you can go to the website of my co-author, Bruce Hardy, professor at the London Business School. You can download the sheet and a note that describes it in great detail. All you need to do, if you want to try this at home, is just to cut and paste your own donor data, the recencies and frequencies, and the number of donors who with those particular characteristics, and use the built-in Excel solver to actually give you the parameters. The words BGBB, the beta geometric beta binomial model, those are just the technical descriptions of the underlying building blocks that are used to capture and project people's behavior here. I won't get into any more of the technical details than that. Again, if people are interested, we'll be offering a separate, more technical workshop that talks about where the B, the G, and the other two Bs come from and how you can actually do these kinds of models in Excel. That's not our goal here. Our goal here is just to tell this basic story. In fact, let me tell it to you right now. The story is this. Each donor, after being born, has basically two coins. One coin is their propensity to make a donation while they're alive, in other words, before they've lapsed. And the other coin is one that they flip every period to say, will they stay around and at least consider donating, or will they just drop out? So each person has a coin, kind of a donation coin and a quote-unquote death coin. Those coins vary dramatically across people. People have very different propensities to give or to die. The parameters of this model simply capture how those propensities vary across people. Are people oriented to give or not? Are people inclined to stick around for a long time or not? And I'll say nothing more than that. In fact, what I'd rather do is jump right to the projections that this model offers. So as we've said, all we need to know are people's recency and frequency. As you can see on this next chart over here, we have our expectations for the next 5 years based on those two dimensions. So the rows represent frequency, which could vary from 0 to 6, depending on how many donations they actually made. And the columns represent recency. What was the time of their last donation? So if we look in the lower right, in other words, someone who gave 6 out of 6 times, and obviously was with us at the most recent opportunity, that, of course, is Bob. And while most of you were saying Bob would give 5 out of 5, this model projects only 3.75, and we'll see whether that's an accurate projection. In fact, I'll tell you right now, it's actually a little on the high side, but it's very close. So a lot of people would be surprised about this. What's going on with Bob? He gave 6 out of 6 times. Why would he be giving so infrequently in the future? And there's really two main answers for that. One answer would be, it might be the case that Bob got lucky, that Bob is clearly a good donor or a good customer. We want more like Bob. But if we had enough people flip a coin 6 times, some of them, even if it's a 50-50 coin, will get 6 heads in a row. The fact that we singled out Bob because of his behavior meant that he was kind of an extreme case, and he, in this case, might be even more donation-oriented than his true underlying propensity would be. So that's one reason, that anytime we rank customers or donors purely on their observed behavior, we're often going to see what many of you know as regression to the mean, that people will become a little bit more normal, a little bit better or worse, depending on how extreme they were at the outset. So that's one part of it. And the other part gets back to our story, the second coin that people are flipping, that there's always the chance that for whatever reason, despite Bob's excellent behavior in the past, he might drop out. And given 5 opportunities to do so, there's a reasonable chance that will happen sometime during that 5-year period. So our expectation for Bob is only 3.75, which is still pretty good. He's still a wonderful donor, but it's important to realize that people's behavior will change, even based on this very simple buy till you die kind of story.
Hi, Pete. We have an interesting question come in. So the question is from someone in the development office of a university, and they are wondering if this is focused on annual giving, or can it help them predict major gifts where potentially it requires a lot of personal attention from the members of the of the receiving institution?
That is an excellent question, and this model would apply best in a setting where people have a regularly occurring series of opportunities. So it would be much more applicable for annual giving in a donation sense. But let me tell you about some of the other settings where this model has been applied outside of the nonprofit setting. So several different hotel chains have applied it to members of their loyalty program, asking, did this customer stay with our hotel at least once this month and the month before, and so on. Or credit card firms have used it. Did this credit card holder have any revolving interest charges on a periodic basis? Or the Canadian Ironman Triathlon used the model to look at people's participation over, say, the past 10 years and project which of them or how often they'll participate in the future. So this model applies in a setting where you have these regularly occurring opportunities. If it's just understanding time till the big one arises, some single major event, we'd use different models for that, but they'd be built off of the same basic building blocks as this one arises. It wouldn't be an entirely separate set of tools, just a different combination of them. But getting back to our comparison over here, I think the really interesting one is Mary versus Sharmila. And you can see in the colored boxes over here the difference between them. Mary is more valuable, as most people suggested. In other words, in this case, recency trumps frequency. We find that to be a fairly general phenomenon. But the magnitude of the difference might surprise you. That even though Sharmila gave one more time, and she only missed 1 year, Mary is 50% more valuable, would be expected to get 50% more donations over the next 5 years. You might find that rather surprising, just how the strength of the difference between recency and frequency. And again, we see that as a general phenomenon. You'll see an even stronger example coming up in the slides to follow. Next, there's Mary versus Chris. Most of you got this right for the right reasons. But Mary and Chris have the same recency and frequency, so whatever other differences they might have, we're not even going to worry about them. Personally, I think it's much easier to put people in a smaller number of buckets to say, Mary and Chris, let's just treat them basically the same. Maybe we'll use different messaging and so on to approach them, but in terms of our expectations of their future value, will be the same. I'd rather keep things simple rather than having many, many shades of gray and treating each donor as truly a unique individual with their own future value. I'd rather keep it simple with a limited number of buckets. Last and indeed least would be Sarah. We didn't expect much out of her. She hasn't done anything for the 6 years since first coming on board, and indeed our expectations for the future are fairly low. But it's not zero. It's a small number, but it's not zero. And I want to emphasize this because, as I said earlier, there are many, many donors like Sarah. In this case, if you saw the numbers carefully on the spreadsheet, out of our cohort of 11,000, about 3,500 of them are Sarah. So while any one of them wouldn't be expected to do much, the collective value of the Sarahs is exceedingly high. In fact, that group of people, the Sarahs, are worth more collectively than most of the other sub-cohorts that you see here. So you want to be real careful about using a hard and fast cutoff. Let's drop them if they haven't done anything in the last 3 years. There's still value in some of those people, many of whom have lapsed, but many of whom might just be dormant. And in the slides to follow, I'm going to show you just a little bit more about how we can sort those things out. So the next slide is just a summary. We're showing you the numbers again and telling you the stories, trying to get you a sense of why we'd expect some of these differences. But the really important question is, are these numbers accurate? Now, we're making these projections about Bob and Mary and Sharmila and Sarah and Chris. But how accurate are the numbers? So after just giving you just a moment to fully soak in these predictions, and let me remind you, these are conditional predictions. We're saying based on what you've done, recency and frequency, what's our best guess of what you'll do over the next period of time. And so on the very next slide, we're going to show you the accuracy of these conditional predictions. So let's start with the one on the left. So that's saying based on the number of donations you've made, 0 through 6, what's our best guess of what you'll do? And what did people in that group actually do? So if we look at the group that made 6 donations out of their 6 opportunities, again, that includes Bob, our expectation, the model projects 3.75. And so if you look at, again, the graph on the left, but the rightmost point on that graph, you'll see there's the dotted line that goes up to 3.75. And the solid line that shows you the actual, in this case, is actually about 3.53. So as I mentioned before, we were a little bit optimistic about Bob, but we're still very close. We're within about 5%. And you can see, regardless of the number of donations that people made, our guess of how many donations they'll make over the next 5 years is quite accurate. And I want to call particular attention to the zero cell, the SARAs, the people who have done nothing. We don't want to just write those people off. We want to have a specific guess about what those people will be worth. And even for those very light donors, where we really don't have a lot of information about them, just a lot of zeros, we're still making very accurate projections. The graph on the right, Ellie, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. One of the questions that just came in is, how many years do you really need to make these models accurate? And how many years would make it most accurate?
So let me replace the word years with opportunities, because in this case it's 6 opportunities. As I said, in other examples it might be monthly. In some cases we've built these models even on a daily basis. So how many opportunities do you need? So in this case we had, our data set was 11 in total. We chose more or less to split it in half, so using 6 years or 6 opportunities to project the next 5. That's pretty safe, as you can see from these results over here. The question is, how little do you need? I honestly wouldn't go much less than this, because we have a behavior here where there's actually 2 different behaviors, people's donation propensities and their dropout propensities. So you need a little bit of a time series on each person to get some sense about what they're doing and whether they're alive or not. So I wouldn't really want to get down to, let's say, less than 4 opportunities. But again, it depends how you define them. You could do this, let's say, on a quarterly basis instead of annual, depending on the cycle of your particular business or solicitation campaigns. Let me quickly point out the graph on the right. That's doing basically the same exercise, but now looking at people based on recency. So if you made a donation in 2001, regardless of how many donations you made, what would we expect for you out of the next 5 years? And so on for the people who haven't been around with us for a while. Once again, the curve tracks pretty well, although I'll admit there's a bit of a troubling gap for the people who haven't made a donation in a long time. In other words, the model is being a little bit too conservative about them. The actual numbers are systematically a bit higher for them. It suggests that maybe there are some other bells and whistles that we might want to add to the model. It suggests that people aren't necessarily flipping the same coin over time. Maybe the coin is becoming a little bit more headsy or tailsy as you flip it over time. We can certainly allow for that too. I won't get into that today. But we want to start with this very basic, simple, stationary model. So these show you some of the conditional projections. Let's jump next to our other results slide to look at it at the overall aggregate level. For these 11,000 people who we acquired in 1995, what do we see for them either on a cumulative basis, total number of donations over time, or on an incremental basis, total donations by year since 1995. And you can see, regardless of how we look at the data, the model is astonishingly accurate. Again, we're taking 6 years of data to project over a 5-year horizon. That's a pretty long time to make these projections. And you can see, whether you look at it on a cumulative basis or the incremental one, we're doing quite accurately, even 5 years out. And we're ignoring the solicitation behavior. David Schweidel will get into that shortly. We're ignoring who these people are or how their lives have changed. We're ignoring conditions in the macro environment, such as, in this case, 9/11 and other activities that have taken place over that 5-year horizon. We're simply telling our coin-flipping story for those 6 years, projecting it over the 5, and we're pretty proud, pretty happy of what we've been able to come up with here. Let me very quickly show you 2 other sets of results from a different nonprofit, but we're fit exactly the same model. But in this case, we're going to do it to a much longer cohort of people. So this is a different nonprofit. We're looking at people who were acquired in 1990 and looking at their recency and frequency over the time period since then. And so you can see the same basic triangular matrix as we showed before. We'd have the Bobs to the lower right, and then you could see the kind of Marys and Sharmillas just above them, and the Sarahs, the people who have done absolutely nothing, to the upper left. It might surprise you that about some of these differences over here. First of all, for the Bobs, if you went, you made 19 donations out of 19 opportunities since you're making your first donation. You'd be expected to make only 3.84 donations over the next 5 years. Again, that might surprise you how low that is. And it points out, once again, that there's a pretty good chance, or at least some chance, that you might drop out sometime over that next 5-year time frame. And then you can look. Go ahead, Ellie.
I have two related questions that might be appropriate to address right now. One is kind of who were these donors that you were looking at? Were they some kind of affinity donors or sourced from a commercial list? And kind of related to that, do the propensities vary by nonprofit or by donor lists? How much can you generalize this across industries?
Well, it generalizes quite well across industries. I've already mentioned some of the domains where this model has been applied. You can think about pretty much any setting where people have a regular occurring set of opportunities, and you're asked the question, did they or didn't they? So again, whether it's staying in a hotel or making a donation or participating in some kind of event, we've had very great success. Even areas where the behavior isn't necessarily discrete, did they or didn't they? Like, for instance, did people take a cruise on a luxury cruise line? That's another area where we've looked at the data. People could take the cruise any time during the year, but we just roll it up to say, did they or didn't they? So it works fairly broadly, but again, in settings where people have these regular occurring opportunities. As far as how people are solicited, that's not even part of this picture over here. Again, David will get a little bit closer to that in his talk. So I wouldn't want to say too much about, again, how these people were acquired and what kind of ongoing relationship the nonprofit has with them. In this case, we're basically ignoring some of those interesting and important characteristics just to get a benchmark of what behavior would be. And then we could start to say how the behaviors might vary across different kinds of donor profiles and acquisition characteristics and so on. That would be a natural next step to take this thing. Let me just show you one more results slide. Then I want to wrap things up and hand things off to David Schweidel. When we go back to Sarah, we want to ask the question, is she quote-unquote dead, or is she just sleeping? Is she lapsed or dormant? How do we know that? And so one of the other really valuable outputs of this model that you'll see on the next slide over here is the probability of being alive, the probability that you're still an active donor considering whether or not to make a donation. In other words, flipping your first coin, will I donate or not? It's pretty clear that people who haven't been around for a while, there's a pretty good chance that they have lapsed. But you'll notice it's not zero. You'll notice that for the Sarahs in the upper left side here, there's a pretty good chance some of those people are active. They're just very, very, very light donors. We just can't expect them to be giving on a regular basis. But it means that we shouldn't be giving up on them, that there's a lot of really light donors who are alive, and if we write them off too quickly, we could be erasing a lot of value from our donor base or customer base. Notice on the right side, regardless of how many times you've made a donation, whether you're a Bob who's given 19 times, or a Sharmilla who gave one less, or a Mary who gave two less, if you gave last time, we know that you were alive at that time. And so the only way you could be lapsed at this point would be if your quote-unquote death coin came up heads during that time. In this case, there'd be a 0.07 chance of that occurring. So it's kind of interesting that regardless of the number of donations you made, the chance of being alive is exactly the same if you were with us most recently. At the other extreme, there'd be people who made a bunch of donations but haven't been around for a while. So if we look at people who made, let's say, 7 donations, but the last one was in 1997, if you were that active but have done nothing since then, you're almost surely dead. You're almost surely lapsed. In fact, people like that would be even more lapsed than someone like Sarah, who has done absolutely nothing. We call this the paradox of increasing frequency. The idea that the more you gave, if you haven't been around in a while, the even deader you are. And so if we look at the Sharmilla equivalent, someone who gave 18 times to skip the last year, you would think that's a pretty good donor. But someone who gave 18 times but skipped the last year is almost surely dropped out. There's just no way that she would have not given and still been active. And notice that the probability there is surprisingly low, 0.37. So there's a lot of insights that emerge from having a model that gives you these diagnostic probabilities as well as the overall forecasts. So if I can wrap things up over here, we like to leverage the idea of recency and frequency rather than take into account all of the other characteristics that people would use for data mining. Those are good things, some of those measures. They're just not that helpful from a predictive standpoint. They're useful for profiling and messaging, but they're not going to help predict the behavior that much. The model's pretty good. It generalizes fairly well. I'll say no more than that. I do want to emphasize once again the ability to implement this model in Excel. Go ahead, Ellie.
I do think you need to say a little bit more than that. So someone asked a clarifying question. How much are the coefficients of the model generalizable versus reapplying the model to a new data set?
You know, I've seen vast differences across cohorts. For instance, I've applied this model, in putting aside all the other settings, in about probably 6 different nonprofit settings, and I've seen very, very different propensities on the giving and the lapsing across different scenarios. One of the things that we're very interested in doing is doing it for a given nonprofit, but for different cohorts over time. As we acquire new donors, how do their propensities vary compared to the cohorts that preceded them? And our relationship and messaging efforts making people a little bit more inclined to give or a little bit less likely to lapse. So seeing some of those differences across cohorts within a nonprofit is a very, very interesting exercise. And the nice thing about this model is that it gives you very simple summaries to get a very quick and clear read on how these cohorts are varying from one another, how our messaging is moving the needle favorably or not. But across different nonprofits, across completely different settings, the propensities can vary quite dramatically. But fortunately, the model is fairly robust and seems to capture those different kinds of behaviors fairly well.
Two other questions while you're wrapping things up. We had questions about does the solicitation history or the economy play a role in these models?
I've ignored it over here. David's going to pick up on the interplay with the solicitation history. But again, I've ignored it, and we're still making very accurate projections. And I'm not saying you should ignore it. I'm not saying that solicitations don't matter. But I'm saying if we just treat them more or less as kind of the background noise that's going on in these people's lives, we can still make fairly accurate forecasts of what they're likely to do. And that's nice to know. It's nice to be able to put people in buckets and score the database and saying who are the potentially more valuable donors and so on. But to really take action on it, we need to come back to solicitations. And, of course, we need to come back to, who they are, where they live, what they read, what other kinds of behaviors do they engage in. So I'm not saying we ignore those things. I'm just saying for forecasting and initial diagnostic purposes, we don't necessarily need that kind of information. Let me wrap it up with this slide over here. If you're interested, first of all, in the research center that Ellie spoke about, here's some information about it. If you'd like to see more of my specific papers or follow me on Twitter, you can do that. I'd like to make a quick shout-out to this workshop I'll be doing in San Francisco next month. 2-day workshop where we lay out the kinds of building blocks to do this kind of customer base analysis, to really understand how to capture people's propensities, how to project them, how to diagnose them, and so on. If you're interested, you can go to our website and find information about it, or send me an email. I can tell you more about that. But I'd really like to get to the so what part of it. Ultimately, it's great to build this kind of descriptive model, but we want to be able to use it to be able to make a better statements about who we should target and when and how. So what David Schweidel is going to do is he's going to start with a similar kind of framework that captures people's underlying propensities, but then layer on the solicitation aspects. So let me hand things off to David Schweidel over here, and then if there's time at the end, we can take other questions about both talks. David, take it away.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks, everyone, for tuning in this afternoon or this morning, wherever you might be. So like Pete had said, the work that I'm going to be talking about, gauging the impact of fundraising efforts on donation activity, we're going to build off of the same general framework, the same coin flipping story. So to go back to that, each individual that the organization has acquired as a donor, they've got two coins. One coin they're flipping each month in this case to decide whether or not they're going to make a donation, and then they have this other coin that they're flipping to decide whether or not they're going to continue to remain active. So that's our question of is someone lapsed versus are they dormant? So let me show you some of the details as far as the data that we're looking at, and we'll see how we're going to be able to bring the solicitation activity into this modeling framework. And the general way that we're going to be thinking about this is by looking at solicitation activity as a means of changing those coins. So what's the likelihood that somebody's going to make a donation in a given month? What's the likelihood that somebody's going to drop out in a given month? Solicitation activity can affect those probabilities. So this project, which is joint work with George Knox, who's going to be joining Drexel University in the fall, this was work that was done using data made available to the Direct Marketing Educators Foundation for a large nonprofit organization. The sample, you see it's a relatively large sample. I believe this was a fairly small slice of their overall donor base. And what we had done was we had pulled 20%, so roughly 4,000 donors out of this sample to monitor. And we had data on behavior, I believe the beginning of 2002, tracked them for 56 months. And we want to make sure that this model is going to forecast well. So we took the first 40 months to estimate this model, and then we're going to use the remaining 16 months to make sure that the model is actually working. So if we look at what the donation behavior is over time, and there are two dimensions that we could look at this at. One is the number of donors, so out of the 4,000 or so that are making a donation in a given month. And then the other dimension is how much are they donating? So what's the total dollar amount that these donors are contributing to the organization? And so we can see some regularities show up in this time series plot. So we can see there are some peaks that recur around November, December, January. You can see toward the left, November 2002 through February 2003. We see a spike there. We see another spike November 2003 through to February 2004. Another spike in the winter of 04-05. Another spike in 05-06. So there's some indication that there's some evidence of seasonality here. But the other piece that we observe, if we look at the heights that those peaks get to, comparing the winter of 2002-2003 and the winter of 03-04 versus the last 2 years that we look at, so in 04-05 and 05-06, it's not getting to the same height. And one potential explanation for that may be that these donors are dropping out over time. So early on, when we first acquire these donors, more donors may be active. As time passes and they're flipping that second coin of, do I remain active, some of those donors are dropping out. Now, some of the questions that had come up in Pete's presentation had been along the lines of, well, what's happening with the solicitation activity? So let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at what the mailing activity looks like over this same period of time to these donors. First, let's look at what's going on at the aggregate level. So not breaking it down based on the individual donors, and we can see that it's from a month-to-month basis, it's a little bit jagged. It looks like for the most part, maybe every other month, almost all of the donors are getting mailings early on. In 2002 and 2003, you can see that we get up to almost 100% of our sample receiving mailings in some months. But then as we move later on into this observation period, once we get to around 2005 and into 2006, the height that we get to as far as the proportion of donors receiving mailings, it's dropping down to roughly 40%. So early on, as we've acquired these donors as they're young in their relationship with the organization, we're seeing a lot of mailing activity from the organization. As it goes further out in time, we're seeing less mailing activity. And this is going along the lines of what we saw in the previous slide with higher donation activity early on, lower donation activity as we moved later into the observation period. And focusing on these donors who have already been acquired. So we're looking at donors once they've been acquired by the organization. So we're not looking at the inflow of new donors. This is getting donors to continue donating to the organization over time. And one of the issues that we grapple with as far as figuring out is it our mailing strategy that does it? It's this question of causality that we run into, where we typically have the link that if I send you a mailing, I send you a solicitation, that solicitation impacts how likely it is you're going to make a donation. It may impact how much you're going to contribute, but at the same time, in the next month, how much these donors have given to us in the past, how recently they've given to us in the past, may also play a role in affecting future mailing activities. So we run into this chicken and egg problem that we need to take into account when we're doing our analysis. If we think about those two time series plots that we had seen, the donation activity and the mailing activity, there is a pattern between them, that donation activity is lower as we get later into the observation period, and mailing activity was lower as we got later into the observation period. So it's a question of, if I scale back my mailing activity, is that contributing to lower donation activity, or could I make greater revenue? Could we bring in more donations if we were to ramp up our mailing efforts? So let's go back to the recency and frequency discussion that Pete had raised in his part of the talk, where if we think about this in terms of each particular year or each particular month, does someone make a donation, yes or no? That's relying just on the observed donation behavior. But the other piece that we have to take into account here is the fundraising efforts, the solicitation activity. Have each of these individuals received a mailing? So in this case, I just pull out two hypothetical individuals, Mary and Chris. We see that Chris gave a little bit more recently than Mary had, and if we were relying just on the recency and frequency, it might be enough for us to say at this point, okay, we want to focus on Chris. He's the one who's of greater value to us. But when we look at what's going on with their fundraising efforts, should we be, even though they have the same level of frequency, should we treat them as relatively comparable, or should we discount Mary even more based on when she's received these fundraising efforts? So Mary, who's received fundraising efforts in almost every period, hasn't given in the last 2 years, whereas Chris hasn't received any fundraising efforts in the last 3 years, but he has made a contribution. So we have to take into account the role that these fundraising efforts may have on these donation decisions. At the same time, we have to take into account the impact that past donation behavior may have on the firm's decision to send out subsequent solicitations. So let me give you an example of kind of how this model is working. I'm not going to throw the mathematics or the Greek up there. I'm happy to share that paper with anyone who wants to go through all this in detail. But let's keep this again in terms of a coin flipping story, but with a few more dimensions. So if we start on the left hand of this slide, once we've acquired a donor, we begin by sending them a solicitation. In that first period, they make a decision to donate. The coin comes up heads. In the following month, we make another solicitation, and they respond by giving us another donation. The coin again came up heads. So we might say, all right, one more time, we're going to send them a mailing. And in this case, we don't receive a donation back from them. So they don't respond to that particular mailing. In the following period, we might decide not to send them a solicitation, and we also don't get a donation from them. And this plays out over time, so in this case, from month to month. So there's a sequence of solicitations that are being received by individuals. There's a sequence of donation activity that we're observing, and that's what our model is going to be built on. So the model is going to be built on donation activity given the solicitations that you've received. It's going to take into account solicitation activity based on what the donors have done in the past, and we're also going to allow for these donors to potentially drop out over time. So if we look underneath these coin flips, what we know is at the time of that last donation, At the time the coin came up heads, we know that a customer is active at that particular point in time. After that last donation, that's where we have to make an inference as far as whether or not this customer is dormant or whether this customer has lapsed. If the customer is, or if the donor is still dormant, potentially sending the fundraising efforts, sending solicitations to that donor can get them to re-engage. But if they're truly gone, if they've really lapsed, those fundraising efforts aren't going to have a return for us. So to just give a summary of what this analysis looks like, there are a couple of components in here. The three model pieces that we're working with, this idea of this latent lifetime. So is a customer still active? Is the donor still potentially going to give to us, or have they lapsed and are they gone for good? So that's one piece that we're going to take into account. We're also going to take into account the time between donations and the amount of the donation. And for all three of those model components, fundraising efforts can play a role. So solicitation activity can affect the time horizon, the lifetime over which these donors are going to be making contributions. It could potentially shorten the time between donations, so accelerating donation activity. And fundraising efforts could increase the size of the donations that contributors are given. So those would all be positive effects. But there's also work to suggest that excessive fundraising efforts may actually irritate donors. So it's possible that we could see fundraising efforts actually shorten the time horizon over which individuals are making contributions to an organization. So we're going to allow the data to reveal to us what the impact of fundraising is on each of these three components. The model that we build also takes into account the relationship that's going to exist between the time between donations and the size of these donations. So do we find evidence of compensating behavior, that if it's been a long time since I've made a contribution, I might give a larger than average contribution. If I've given fairly recently and if it's a very short time between donations, I might not give as much as I normally would. So that's also going to be incorporated into our analysis, and we're also going to incorporate how the firm may be targeting these individuals. So we're going to allow for these differences in the fundraising efforts that donors receive. And the way that we're going to be doing that is, through a relatively simple model of looking at the recency of donation, looking at the frequency of donation, and looking at the size of the donations, and are those metrics informative of which donors are going to receive fundraising efforts. So those donors who haven't made a contribution in a long time, they're going to be less likely to get mailings. And that's what our analysis reveals, that the longer you've gone since you made a donation, the organization is less likely to send you another solicitation. But we're also going to find some differences, that there are some individuals who are more prone to get mailings compared to other individuals. And that may be indicative of additional information that the organization has that we don't necessarily have, but we're going to allow for that flexibility in the model. So, for example, in the case of university development of donors, it might be that there are some individuals with very high capacity who receive more attention compared to those individuals who are known to have a lower capacity. So we're going to allow for that difference in baseline attention in our particular analysis. And, we don't have time, and I don't want to bore everyone with the Greek letters and the equation, but all of those, all of the specification is available, either from me. I'll share that with Ellen, and that can be made available if anyone's interested. So that's the summary of how this model is working. Now, if we look at the question of does it work, so let's look at how well we do at predicting donation behavior during this holdout period. So fitting the model for 40 months, trying to predict donation behavior over the next 16 months. And we see when we do that, we do reasonably well. We're not capturing every particular bump in this figure. You can see that we missed the height of the spike. I believe that's in the January month. But taking into account the donation activity, taking into account the firm's fundraising efforts, we are capturing the general trend in terms of the volume, in terms of the dollar amount of the donation activity. So the model itself is working reasonably well. Now, we've also estimated to this same model, to the same data, the type of model that Pete had talked about earlier that did not consider the solicitation efforts. And that model also fits this data fairly well. But what this model allows us to do is look at what's the impact of these fundraising efforts. So even though the organization has used a particular mailing strategy, we can look at what's the hypothetical return on investment if we were to use a different mailing strategy. So should we be sending out more mailings? Should we be pulling back and sending out fewer mailings? Should we be reallocating resources from one group to another? I'll show you some of the analyses that we've done as far as those comparisons. So let's take a look at just how does fundraising efforts, how do these solicitations impact these different model components? Well, we do find evidence to show that the fundraising efforts increase the likelihood of making a donation while individuals are still active. So if donors are still active, the more mailings they're getting, they're more likely to make a contribution. As far as the impact on how much they're giving, for the majority of donors, more is better. For about a quarter of the donors, didn't have a significant effect. So even though it was impacting the incidence, the likelihood that they make a donation wasn't changing how much they were contributing. The place where I think it gets interesting here is the impact on the latent lifetime, on are the donors still active. For the majority of donors, for the 75% of donors, more solicitations increase the time horizon. These donors are going to stay active longer. So the more they're sent, not only are they making contributions, they're more likely to make contributions, but they'll also do it over a longer period of time. But then we have this 25% where increased solicitation efforts are actually going to shorten the time horizon. Now, so these individuals, they have a higher baseline affinity of sticking around, but the more mailings that they're receiving, it's actually lowering that likelihood of remaining active. So they become they're going to be less likely to stick around. So even though we're more likely to get donations while they're active, it's a shortened time horizon that they're going to be active for. So what this analysis lets us do is derive individual level measures of how much are fundraising efforts going to increase the expected value, let's say, of a particular donor. What I want to do is let's try to bring it back to some of the more commonly used measures of recency, frequency, and monetary value. So these RFM segmentation measures that are commonly used, let's say that we don't have the resources to come up with individual specific strategies. Could we come up with strategies for groups of different levels of recency or groups of different levels of frequency? So if we go into our particular sample of 4,000 donors and we were to look at two levels of recency, have they made a contribution in the last year? And let's look at two levels of frequency. Have they made multiple repeat contributions? Gives us 4 cells that we're going to be looking at. And you see, the majority of donors, just like we've seen in Pete's talk, the majority of these donors are not donating, have not donated recently, and have not donated very much. So that's going to account for a large portion of the donor base. We do have some 13% who have donated recently and give with a high frequency, and the remaining 2 cells less populated. So we're going to look at 2 measures. First, let's look at how likely is it that these different groups are going to give at all in the future. So how likely is it that these individuals have lapsed already? So this measure of the probability that a donor is still alive. So if we follow this branched diagram down the left-hand side, we can see for those recent donors, both the high frequency and the low frequency donors very high probability that they're going to be giving again in the future. Now, in this case, keep in mind, these are fairly coarse buckets. We've lumped a lot of people together in the high recency, high frequency bucket, in the high recency, low frequency bucket. So we do have these measures for each individual. But for the purpose of just illustrating how we can use this model, we'll look at them in these different groups. So if we go down the left side of the high recency donors, very likely that these individuals are going to be making are still active, may make a donation again at some time in the future. On the other half of this branch, if we go down the right side with the donors who haven't given in the last year, there we get quite a bit more variation. So the non-recent donors who have given very frequently, there's still a chance that they're going to give in the future. The ones who have not given frequently, those are the ones where it may be the case that they're not going to give again. But that's where the majority of people are. So even though on average we're only dealing with a 17% chance of them making a future donation, that's where the majority of our donors are. And you see at the bottom of this slide, what I've done is broken it out based on the level of the donation. So splitting the average donation amount from the donors in half, high versus low. We see some variation along the monetary aspect of behavior, but not too much variation there. Really the differences we're seeing relate to the recency and frequency. So giving us a little bit more support for, why the model that Peter talked about works so well, just using recency and frequency, that's really where a lot of the variation is going to be contained.
David?
Yes.
Can I interrupt you for a couple of questions?
Sure.
So we've had a couple people ask about, in this particular data set, were all the solicitations male solicitations? Have you done any analysis of solicitation by the type of solicitation, either what kind of message it is or what channel it comes across?
So in this context, it was direct mail, so physical mail. Unfortunately, we didn't have information on the variation in the message content, but that's something that the framework that we're talking about would allow us to actually go out and test. So should we be using copy A versus copy B? Well, that's something that we can use these frameworks to assess and actually come up with a measure for how much better are the different messages that we might use for different individuals. But in this analysis, we weren't able to do that.
So if someone has a data set with that kind of information, they should step forward, and that could be analyzed using this framework.
Absolutely.
Couple more questions. The question, I think, is getting at the idea of, have you seen any evidence that solicitations could have a negative impact on donation behavior?
So the evidence that we had picked up on that was it pertained to about 25% of the individuals where even though you get them to give in the short term, so you increase the likelihood of giving while they're active, it reduces the likelihood that they're actually going to stick around. So, think of it as I get the solicitation in the mail, I respond to it, and then I write off the organization because I'm so fed up with how many pieces of mailings I've been sent. So that's the place that we have to be careful, kind of the short-term versus long-term trade-off.
And the last question is, I think a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Do you contribute to your alma mater?
I have contributed to my alma mater. And coincidentally, I gave in December. So, it pertains to that large spike.
Excellent. Good.
So, any other questions right now?
One last question. If you're relying everything on recency, frequency, and monetary value, does that create some kind of a bias?
In terms of?
Maybe we should. Maybe the questioner can kind of type in some clarification, and I'll get back to you with that.
Okay. No, that sounds good. Yeah, I've used the RFM measures, and Pete, chime in also if you have a different view on it. I've used them because that's where a lot of the segmentation is already being done. And also, if we think about kind of, the mechanism of, what is the individual level process generating this behavior, the recency and frequency are summary measures, but these models are based on, each particular occasion has somebody given yes or no. So really, we've got a series of zeros and ones or heads versus tails that can be summarized based on recency and frequency, but that's not the level of data that we're actually that's necessarily being used. In the particular analysis that I presented, even though I've summarized it by recency and frequency, we're actually taking advantage of the full sequence of yes-no decisions to donate.
If I could just chime in real quick to the question about bias. A bias could emerge if you're selecting people based on RFM, but we're keeping everybody. So in that first analysis, those 11,000 people I was analyzing was every single individual. So we're not screening out people who are donating excessively often or not often. So there shouldn't be any bias then.
And in my analysis, we do have to worry about that problem because the people who have donated more recently, more frequently, those are the ones who are going to be more likely to be getting the mailing, and that's something that's being incorporated into the modeling framework to try and control for. Right, so, Ellie, I think we're good on questions for the moment?
We're great on questions. I want to make sure you have enough time to finish up.
All right, great. So, I've looked at this probability that a donor is still alive, but let's get at something a little bit more concrete. Let's get at, how much, what's the incremental benefit that we're getting from these fundraising efforts? So the next couple of slides, I'm contrasting two particular scenarios. One scenario says we do no fundraising efforts, we do no solicitations during the 16-month holdout period. And let's contrast that with where we send out a mailing to individuals every month of the holdout period. And what I'm going to do is compare the donation behavior at the end of each of the individuals under the scenario when they get no mailings and the scenario when they get mailings every single month of the holdout period. Now, these are two particular mailing scenarios. George and I have the results from all possible combinations of mailing scenarios, and we can look at those to see are pulsing strategies better than doing long blasts with emails and then long periods or long blasts with direct marketing and long periods with no direct marketing. So even though I'm comparing the no marketing versus full marketing scenario, we can play these kind of what-if games with any potential marketing strategy that an organization might be considering. Right. So what this figure shows us is on the x-axis we have how long has it been since the last donation, so the recency of donation, and then on the y-axis it's the difference in expected donations, the expected dollar of donation between these two scenarios. So how much do I get when I send you mailings every single month minus how much I would get if I did zero marketing. So trying to get at a measure of what's the value, what's the dollar amount associated with the marketing activity. And you can kind of see the general trend is there's more value on average for the donors who have made contributions recently. Overall, as the longer it's been since they made that donation, there's less return on. There's going to be a lower return on the investment because there's those donors who haven't given to us recently. There's a greater chance that they've already dropped out, and if they've truly lapsed, that marketing activity isn't going to get them to be more likely to donate. The people who we want to capture are those donors who might be dormant. So they're still active, but if I hit them with the marketing activity, I might be able to get them to resume being active and engaged donors. So the general trend is those people who haven't given as recently, less valuable, or there's a lower return on the marketing activity. The circle that's up here, wanted to point out these individuals because it stands out quite a bit that we have these donors who haven't given in more than 2 years in most cases. And we went back to the raw data to see what was going on, to see, did we do something wrong in the particular analysis? Because what we're inferring here is even though they haven't given in a long period of time, there's still this high expectation of value in terms of sending these individuals marketing. And looking at what the organization actually did, so in a 16-month period, they sent these individuals more than 11 mailings. And that's what I meant when we were saying that there's a good chance that the organization may have additional information that we haven't incorporated into our analysis. So perhaps these are the higher capacity individuals that the organization is paying more attention to, and that's why they're sending them more than 11 mailings in a 16-month period, even though it's been a very long time since they've given us anything. So this is looking at that return on investment, the expected increase in donation. How does that relate to recency? We can also relate it to frequency, to past average donation amounts, and see which are the groups that, which are these RFM cells are the most valuable for us. So in this case, on the far right side, low recency, low frequency, low monetary value, on average, we're only expecting to get $8. If we were to mail them every month, that's the increase in donations that we're expecting to get from them. Contrast that with the far left side, the high recency, high frequency, high givers. We're expecting an average increase through our marketing efforts of $85. Now, again, there's variation within each of these different buckets, but it gives us a sense for how much is marketing actually doing for us. Now, even though we've looked at the two extreme scenarios of no marketing versus marketing every single month, we can test all possible combinations. We could look at maybe we only send mailings during the winter months. Maybe we want to look at a strategy of mailing every other month. And each of these measures, we're getting estimates at the individual level. So even though I've aggregated them to a large degree here, we get them for every donor that in our sample. We're getting a measure of what's the return on marketing for that individual. And so we could tailor, if resources permit, we can tailor that strategy to different individuals. So just to wrap up my part of this presentation, and then we'll take a couple more of the questions. The analysis itself, I think one of the big strengths of this is, we're taking advantage of data that most organizations are already collecting. The individual level donation behavior of individuals, the solicitation history. That's what's allowing us to generate these individual level forecasts of future behavior. So allows us to decompose the role that fundraising efforts have on these different aspects of behavior. We see that for some donors, we have that short-term versus long-term trade-off as far as excessive direct marketing potentially having negative consequences. We're acknowledging the relationship that may exist between fundraising efforts and donation history. Try to take into account that selection bias problem that might occur of if we're sending high levels of marketing to the high-capacity donors, of course we're expecting them to give more, but that's also the reason why they're getting more mailings in the first place. So we're taking that into account. And, the key piece here, we want to be able to bring this back to some measure of a return on investment. So what is marketing actually doing for us? What's the most efficient strategy for us to be using? This framework kind of takes what Pete had talked about, adds the solicitation activity to it, and gives us a way of trying to identify the right mailing policy, the right strategy for each of our donors. So, Ellie, are there any questions at the moment that we may want to address before we kind of tie things together and we turn it back over to you?
Sure. One of the questions is there a way to determine which 75% or so of the population are more likely to respond positively to a solicitation? Can you use this tool for that kind of targeting?
Right. So our analysis, it does derive for us kind of that expectation of if we kind of have these different groups of individuals, which are the ones who tend to be more responsive to direct marketing activity versus who are the ones that are not. I'd say we want to be a little bit more granular than that. And one thing is who are the 75% who are going to respond to the mailing efforts. The next level is, of that group, which of the donors are still active and which have already lapsed on us. Because it's not going to be worth it to necessarily target those individuals where there's a high chance that they've already lapsed.
Got it. And I think that's all the questions that we have for just right now.
All right, sounds good.
So I do have a few questions that are kind of broader that I'd like to throw at, maybe at Pete. So this one might be a challenging one, Pete. What would the typical cost for an analysis like this be, say, with 100,000 donors?
I'd like to believe that it's free. I'd much prefer for companies to be able to take the spreadsheet and the model that I was talking about earlier and use it internally. It's actually a relatively easy model to run. It's not that hard to figure out what's going on. To me, it's much better to see nonprofits and all organizations figuring out how to run these models, diagnose them, act on them, than outsourcing them, whether it's to academics or to consultants. So I'm in the education mission primarily, not a consultant.
Thanks, Pete. The next question is for David, I think. Can the approach you use where you're bringing in an understanding of how the solicitations affect users, could you use that to identify people who would respond negatively to a mailing, who might die because of the mailing?
Right. We're going to be able to come up with an inference of how likely is it that they're in that particular group. So based on how they've responded in the past, how likely is it that they're in that particular group? We can come up with kind of a probabilistic assessment of that.
And if I can go one step further with that, so that's how we think, is the probability that someone's in or not. And then the next level that a lot of people would want is, okay, so what are the demographics? How are people different who have one kind of propensity versus another? And very often demographics and other profiling variables will kind of disappoint you in that way. The age, income, gender aren't quite as predictive of people's probabilities of being, let's say, a lapsed donor as we'd like them to be. So I'm not saying you should give up on demographics, but they don't have quite the promise that a lot of people hold for them.
Great. Well, I'm going to hand it back to Rob from Russ Reed for a few final comments. Rob?
Thanks. It was an awesome presentation, and clearly there was power in academic research teams and business practitioners coming together to try and help and solve the pressing problems in the nonprofit industry. And we definitely, this team looks forward to seeing more work from the Wharton Initiative. And then just finally, as shared with you, is a foundational belief that organizations can apply sound data analysis and tools such as what we've seen today to effectively target donors.
Great. Thanks so much, Rob. So I'll just wrap things up by saying I'm really delighted that all of you were able to join the webinar. We hope this was an effective way for you to kind of learn something new in your lunch hour on a Friday. If you're interested in learning more about the Customer Analytics Initiative, you can go to our website. You can see the link there on the slide. You can get information about the more hands-on how-to workshop that's going to be offered in San Francisco coming up. And if you have any more questions, feel free to try to type them in, and we'll get back to you by email. So thanks very much, and have a great afternoon.